Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World's Panorama, the only show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global news. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. India-China spar over South China Sea. While Navy chief talks of protecting Indian interests in the diplomatically choppy region, China hits back. Political crisis grips Egypt. President Mohamed Morsi defies protesters, pushes on with a controversial referendum on Islamist-backed constitution. Violence intensifies in Syria. NATO approves deployment of interceptor missiles even as US-UN warn Assad against use of chemical weapons. And IOC bans the Indian Olympic Association over elections. Athletes in India hope the ban could bring about a change. And straight to the story in focus this week. Tensions have simmered in the South China Sea for many years, but now have escalated this year as the increasingly powerful China, which sees virtually the entire sea as its territory, begins to assert its long-standing offshore claims more vigorously. Against the backdrop of Beijing's assertiveness in South China Sea, India's Navy chief, in a tough message on Monday, said that the rapid modernization of the Chinese Navy is a major cause for concern. The Navy chief's remarks came on a day when the National Security Advisor, Mr. Shashank Menon, was in Beijing to hold talks with China's influential state councillor, Dai Bingguo. Now, Beijing's chief point person for boundary talks, and in fact, we're going to be discussing this in great length, India's economic interests and what they mean. And this week, I have a special guest with me, Shashank, former Foreign Secretary. Thanks, sir, so much for joining me on the show. Before we get his perspective, why don't we have a look at this report?
Not that we expect to be in those waters very, very frequently, but when the requirement is there, for example, in situations where our country's interests are involved, ONGC, Videsh, etc., we will be required to go there, and we are prepared for that.
It was this very statement from the Navy chief on Monday that sparked off a bigger debate, a potential new escalation of tensions in the South China Sea, where fears of an armed conflict have been growing steadily. Over in China, the rebuttal was sharp and quick. Beijing stood firm over disputes in the South China Sea as tensions rose with neighbors India, Vietnam and the Philippines.
China has indisputable sovereignty over the islands in the South China Sea and their surrounding waters. China opposes unilateral oil and gas development in disputed waters of the South China Sea. We hope that the concerned countries respect China's position and rights and respect efforts made through bilateral talks to resolve disputes.
India has sparred diplomatically with China in the past over its gas and oil exploration block off the coast of Vietnam. India's prime interests in the area are predominantly economic. The main reason being the Malacca Strait, which acts as a lifeline for Indian trade interest in the Asia-Pacific region. Over 55% of the trade of the Asia-Pacific transits through the South China Sea. Apart from that, India is in collaboration with Vietnam for exploring and producing oil in the sea. Earlier this year, Indian and Vietnamese state-owned oil companies signed a pact that included new investments and the exploration and supply of oil and gas to the two countries. Any display of naval assertiveness by India in the South China Sea would likely fuel concern that the navies of the two rapidly growing Asian giants could be on a collision course as they seek to protect trade routes and lock in the supply of coal, minerals and other raw material from foreign sources.
Let me bring in Mr. Shashank into the discussion, sir. On one hand, you see the Navy chief saying one thing and the NSA saying another thing. As far as China is concerned, the South China Sea is concerned, do you see a disconnect here?
Well, the naval chief has to talk objectively about the Chinese capabilities which are being expanded greatly and which have become kind of a threat, a perceived threat by the neighboring countries. It's not just a question of India, but mainly the ASEAN countries and countries like Japan. They feel that their sovereignty would be curtailed to some extent if China starts the operations very aggressively pursuing its sovereign right over these islands and start boarding ships and examining the cargo that they are carrying passing through these straits. So therefore, it's very important that for countries in the region, that there must be freedom of movement, freedom of navigation, which should be kept up, and therefore the naval chief is only reasserting those rights which any naval chief has to do. Of course, one has to see that National Security Advisor, who has to deal with the security aspects and who is the Indian special representative of the Prime Minister, to deal with China on the boundary matters, on the overall relationship with China. I think he has to take into account what are the capabilities being generated, what are the fears, and how India should respond to them. And he is carrying on a conversation. He carried on conversations with the outgoing Chinese administration. So therefore, this is also a period when there will be transition, and assessments are being made as to how the new Chinese administration will pursue these claims which have been pursued in a rather aggressive manner by the
Absolutely, that's
present
going to be a very
administration.
crucial factor, the transition that's taking place in China. But India's prime interests are economic. Let's just talk about the South China Sea for the moment. The question is, how far is India willing to go to protect its interest in the region? China, we know, has a more aggressive stance, as you also just mentioned. What about India?
Well, India has to dovetail its policy on economic interests with the countries of the region. So like Vietnam has very deep economic interests about the undersea resources. Similarly, Philippines is concerned not only about their resources but also about its own threat which it may perceive from the Chinese side. So therefore, we have seen that in the recent ASEAN summit, some of these ASEAN countries came up rather strongly. And even though Chinese had been able to persuade the Cambodian leadership, the host country, to somehow not give any reference at all to any international negotiations or a multilateral negotiation, keeping in mind the law of the sea convention, but the Philippines leaders, they raised the subject, and therefore they put very directly their concerns into the picture. The Americans, of course, they've also been saying that, well, the Asia as it is growing, becoming the most important region for the growth of the world. So the US is developing its pivot to Asia. It wants the freedom of navigation, and almost 2/3 of the goods which are carried by the seas, by the ships in this region, for so many countries, they pass through the Malacca Strait, pass through the South Sea. So therefore, it's very important that Chinese, who have benefited greatly by globalization, by the export markets all over the world, they should keep in mind that they have to pursue peaceful policies in Asia and which will stabilize the region rather than destabilize it.
Okay, that's also another crucial point. But, India and China, of course, if you just take into account these two nations and the South China Sea dispute, obviously their stands are different and their thinking is very, very different. For India, China is a major concern, but for China, India is not such a major concern. Let's say it's more concerned about, US or let's say Japan. So how do you see this?
Well, China is a kind of superpower. It's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Also, from time to time, there has been talk that the Americans and the Chinese should set up some kind of a G2 grouping, which of course is a matter of the past. At the same time, it's not a democratic country. So sometimes there are these conclaves of democracies in Asia or democracies worldwide, which have tried to advise China how to pursue policies towards further democratization, which Chinese have not liked. So there are this kind of mismatches between China and India. Chinese consider that Japan is a threat to them, has been a threat in the past. The United States, they feel that is really outside the region, and they should not try to use this pivot to Asia to enhance their role in the Asian countries and somehow or the other circumscribe Chinese rise of power. Chinese have, of course, they have been able to change their posture. At one time, they were talking of the rise of China. Now they have started talking about the peaceful development of China. The new government, which is going to come in next March, we find that many of the senior leaders have either studied in America or they have children who are studying in America or in the West, which means that they have to be more mindful, more open to the international thinking and to what is thinking in the current superpower that's the United
Right.
States.
So to conclude this, we've talked about China's aggressive stance. We've talked about the reforms that we might see because of the change in leadership in China. As far as India is concerned, do you think it should be more assertive as far as its economic interests in the region are concerned, and just what we heard from the Navy chief, and then the NSA saying that he was fed those words by the media?
Well, what we have to see is that India should achieve its objectives so that it can reach its potential. Okay. That would mean the infrastructure development, road networks, airports, heliports, wherever they have to be constructed. Secondly, they have to make sure that the neighboring countries do not become a pad for launching any aggressive actions against India or any infiltration, etc. So those kind of issues we have to keep in mind. As far as China is concerned, we have many commonalities.
Right.
For example, we would like the PAC-Af region to be stabilized. Chinese have invested huge amounts of money in Afghanistan. The same way, we are building links with ASEAN countries. We are concerned about terrorism in Central Asia. We are concerned about development in Africa, in Latin America. So there are many areas where we have common interests.
Absolutely.
And
so
we have-
India and China should take these common interests and perhaps go into a positive direction. Thanks so much, sir, for joining me this week on the show and sharing your thoughts with me. With that, we take a very quick break. This week's development on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are up next with many more reports. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us. Now, the ability to lose gracefully is an element of a healthy political system so far lacking in Egypt's nascent democracy. The non-Islamist opposition doesn't like the draft constitution put forward by an Islamist-dominated assembly, and it knows the document, which is supported by President Mohamed Morsi, is likely to win approval in the December 15th referendum. So it's determined to stop the vote, protesting and threatening a general strike.
The anti-government sit-in continued in Cairo's Tahrir Square on Thursday, even as the army tanks moved outside the high-security presidential palace. The supporters and opponents of President Morsi clashed with each other early this morning. Vehicular movement stopped in the area as agitated protesters continued to shout anti-government slogans. Morsi's opponents also attacked the headquarters of the Freedom and Justice Party, the Muslim Brotherhood's political arm, in several cities.
When Egypt reaches a point after a revolution when the people of one nation point weapons at each other, this is not democracy. This is terrorism. This is political thuggery.
Accusing President Morsi of creating a new autocracy by awarding himself extraordinary powers, the demonstrators have called for Morsi to step down and dissolve a draft constitution that has divided the nation.
We do not need him in office again. We want him to cancel the constitutional decree, and we want him to dissolve the Constitutional Assembly.
Bidding to end the worst crisis since Morsi took office less than 6 months ago, Vice President Mahmoud Mekki has said that amendments to disputed articles in the constitution could be agreed with the opposition. A written agreement could then go to the parliament to be elected after a referendum on the constitution on 15 December. The Egyptian diplomatic missions have, however, announced that they will boycott supervision of the referendum on the constitution if it goes ahead as planned on 15 December.
Now, Israel is moving forward with plans for 2 major settlement projects in East Jerusalem in spite of a stern warning from Palestine. International anger over Israeli settlement construction has snowballed in recent days following last week's UN recognition of a state of Palestine in lands Israel occupied back in 1967 as a non-member observer in the General Assembly. Here's a roundup.
Despite growing diplomatic pressure from other nations, Israel continues settlement construction plans as a means of punishment towards the Palestinian Authority amid its recent status upgrade in the UN. The fireworks and celebrations were dampened by the Israeli government's announcement that came within 24 hours of the historic UN bid. Just days after Israeli Prime Minister made this announcement.
We
will continue building in Jerusalem and all other areas determined to lie in the state of Israel's strategic interests.
Strategic interest in this case being a plan for building 3,000 settlement units in the West Bank, East Jerusalem and the controversial E1 stretch of land connecting them. Building here would effectively cut off Palestinian centers, dashing plans for a future neighboring state. In 2010, settlement activities brought peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians to a halt.
There's only one way to solve this, and that is to solve those core issues, to negotiate on those core issues. The problem is that it doesn't look like Abbas wants to do that, and I think his going to the United Nations on Thursday is a very strong illustration of that.
E1 is not just another settlement. E1 will dismember the West Bank into a northern canton and a southern canton, and E1 will seal East Jerusalem from its environs in the West Bank. In the absence of the possibility of a contiguous Palestinian state with a connection to Jerusalem, there is no two-state solution.
With newfound UN status, Palestinian President Mohammed Abbas can appeal to the International Criminal Court on this latest move. But the leader is taking a wait-and-see approach for now. Others, however, are more vocal about the announcement, viewing it as a block to peace.
Israel is in a state of aggression, in an unjust state of military occupation, and it is the responsibility of the international community not just to hold it accountable, but also to end this unjust state that is quite dangerous and threatening to peace and security.
Israel's reprisal has thrust its strongest Western allies into an unusually harsh showdown with the Jewish state. On Tuesday, Australia summoned Israel's ambassador in protest, a day after 5 European countries took a similar step.
And after 20 months and tens of thousands of deaths, the civil war in Syria may be reaching a turning point. Troops have waged fierce assaults on rebels around Syria as top Russian and US diplomats failed in talks with the UN peace envoy to reach any sensational decisions to end the conflict.
We have been enough frustrated by this ongoing violence and inability of the international community to bring peace to Syrian people. 21 months, more than 40,000 people have been killed. It is right time that the international community must focus more efforts with the unity of the United Nations, particularly members of the Security Council.
Only a political solution can help end bloodshed in Syria. This was UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's message as he called on world powers at the UN Security Council to unite and take action to end the Syrian conflict. Ban, who has been visiting camps for Syrian refugees in the region this week, hit out at the slow international response to the growing refugee crisis. Meanwhile, earlier in the week, NATO agreed to deploy Patriot missiles to member state Turkey's southern border, bolstering its defense capacity and discouraging any potential attacks from neighboring Syria. Although the military alliance limits the use of Patriots to defensive purposes, many analysts urge that the long-expected move has brought the NATO closer to the Syrian conflict.
This is no longer merely about the border security between Turkey and Syria. Judged from the NATO's position, this has become an issue of international concern.
Tensions in Syria have been escalating as government forces and armed rebels continue to fight in the Darya region and Blackstone neighborhood. On November 28th, rebels attacked the road leading to the international airport in Damascus, further intensifying the situation. Another short break now. After that, a look at the devastation caused by the earthquake in Japan and more world news. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Time now to take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap. Here's Globe Watch.
Silvio Berlusconi's party withdrew its support for Prime Minister Mario Monti on Thursday, raising the risk of a snap election in Italy. But President Napolitano said he would work to avoid a crisis and there was no need for alarm. The PDL party walked out of a Senate confidence vote on a package of economic measures and abstained in a separate confidence vote in the parliament. The Iranian military says it has captured an unmanned US drone aircraft in its airspace over Gulf waters. The naval unit of Revolutionary Guard said they had brought down a scan eagle that was gathering information over Gulf waters. The agency said the drone was captured sometime in the last few days, though it was not clear how it was captured. The United States and Iran are engaged in a dispute over Tehran's nuclear program. A strong earthquake centered off the coast of northeastern Japan shook buildings as far as Tokyo and led to a tsunami warning for coastal areas in the northeast on Friday. The earthquake had a magnitude of 7.3. It triggered a 1-meter tsunami in an area devastated by last year's Fukushima disaster, but there were no reports of deaths or serious damage. Death toll in the Philippines due to Typhoon Bopa has released to 148 based on data released Friday by the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. Almost 65,000 families were still being served inside evacuation centers. The most powerful storm to hit the country this year has forced 87,000 people to seek refuge in emergency shelters. Parts of Mindanao continue to remain without power and communication services.
And if you've missed the week's biggest sporting events, here's your chance to catch up. We bring you sports action.
The IOC imposed a ban on the Indian Olympic Association, saying the Indian body's election on Wednesday would be null and void, claiming government interference in a vote that could result in a tainted official taking over as Secretary General. Meanwhile, defying the ban, the IOC on Wednesday went ahead with its annual general meeting in elections, insisting that it had not done anything wrong. Graham McDowell continued his love affair with California by winning for the first time in 2 years when he held off playing partner Keegan Bradley to clinch the World Challenge by 3 shots on Sunday. The Northern Irishman ended his 2012 campaign on a triumphant note as he closed with a 4-under par 68 to post a 17-under total of 271. Formula One world champion Sebastian Vettel of Germany on Monday told media that his past season was incredibly long and tough. The 25-year-old won his third straight championship in the season-ending Brazil Grand Prix at the end of November after finishing 6th in the race, which left him 3 points clear of Ferrari's Fernando Alonso. Legendary prize fighter Muhammad Ali was named King of Boxing on 3rd December at the World Boxing Council's 50th annual convention in Cancun, Mexico. Ali was appointed King of Boxing by a special committee.
And time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Fans get to see their favorite martial arts superstar Jackie Chan in his latest flick Chinese Zodiac. Jackie Chan plays a treasure hunter seeking to repatriate sculpture heads of the Chinese Zodiac, which were taken from Beijing's Summer Palace by French and British forces during the Opium Wars. Chan toured Shanghai to promote the film and received 2 official certificates for Guinness World Records along the way. Stepping out to show off their latest film, the stars of Promised Land were on hand for the New York premiere on 4th December. Looking handsome in a perfectly fitted suit, John Krasinski worked the media line with his co-star and fellow writer Matt Damon. The film, about a salesman for a natural gas company who experiences life-changing events after arriving in a small town, was written by the talented actors, mostly at Damon's house. South Korean pop star Psy brought the Gangnam Style to a crowd of 4,000 in Singapore. Organizers said the free performance, titled Give Back to Singapore, hoped to show the singer's appreciation of the international public for bringing him global fame. He won the Best Video Award at the MTV Europe Music Awards recently and has performed his hit song with international performers like Madonna and MC Hammer. Britain's Prince William visited his wife Catherine in hospital a day after it was announced that the royal couple are expecting a baby destined to be the country's future monarch. Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, is in the King Edward VII Hospital suffering from acute morning sickness.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. I'll be back next week, same time, with more world news. Till then, you can join us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. This week, we wrap up with beautiful visuals from Rio, where world's largest floating Christmas tree lights up, ringing in the festive season. Goodbye and thanks for watching.